Hello and welcome to The Avatar's Voice, a show where I talk with a different person each episode about virtual worlds. On today's episode, we hear from Bizi Pfeffer. Bizi has been in the virtual world of Second Life for almost 13 years, since April of 2007, a longtime resident of the Second Life mainland community of Bay City and an avid explorer. He owns parcels on several other mainland continents as well, including in the Sansara snowlands and in Nautilus. Bizi is also a scripter with his own virtual world company called Synx, spelled C-Y-N-X, and in the physical world, he's currently in his final year of a software engineering degree at a top-ranking university in Austria. Hi Bizi, thanks so much for being on the show. So I wanted to start off by asking you about your first few days in Second Life all those years ago. Do you remember where on the grid you first rezzed after the tutorial?
Well, the fun thing is, I didn't really complete the tutorial. I never completed the Second Life tutorial because I went online, logged in, and then I was on the tutorial island, but I didn't finish it, so I closed the Second Life viewer. And the next day when I logged in, the HUD was gone, so I didn't know what to do. And I just ran around cluelessly on tutorial island and thought I'd never get off it. And then my dad teleported me with his account to Abbott's Aerodrome. That was the first place I went to, and I think I couldn't teleport for 1 or 2 days because of the bug, so I just sat around Abbott's.
Not a bad place to hang out. That's funny.
I loved old Abbott's, like with the big tower and the skydiving platforms. It was great.
QB will be happy to hear that. I actually spent a lot of time there too when I first joined SL, and I remember that tower and the skydiving platform really was amazing. I'm happy the aerodrome is still there, even if it's in different hands now, but I can't help feeling nostalgic sometimes for those days. Speaking of which, you and I were talking once about SL Go, the streaming service from OnLive that got shut down back in 2015. And we were joking about the old SL Go commercial where two people in a laundromat realize that they just happen to both be in Second Life at the same time on their tablets, and then they walk out together hand in hand. A little improbable as a scenario, obviously, but I wanted to ask, what's your experience been with meeting people through SL?
The good thing in Second Life is that you don't meet people who are next to you in the laundromat, but that you meet people who are all across the globe. That's the fun thing about Second Life. You don't really have that on the internet, maybe in chat rooms, but in Second Life, people come together and like you are from West Coast America, I'm from Middle Europe. We're still sitting here and talking while drinking coffee. I mean, it's virtual, but still it's coffee. Somebody else could join us from Australia or something, and we'd still feel somewhat connected and alive and sitting together. So that's the magic of Second Life, I think. It brings people together from all over the world.
Yeah, that we're sitting sharing that same space. That's the thing, I think, actually, with me, that I've never been... I mean, I'm on Twitter, of course, all the time, but I'm not and have never been on Facebook. I had a MySpace account many years ago, but didn't do much with it. I'm not on Instagram. I appreciate what social media makes possible, even with the downsides, which seem to be more and more apparent every year, and all the privacy issues. But for some reason with Second Life, and this has been me always, though, that I feel like it's more interesting to be able to be in a shared space. A virtual space could be 2D, could be 3D, could be text-based even, like I was on IRC channels and MUDs a lot when I was younger, but it's still that feeling of being together in a virtual world of some kind.
Fun thing about virtual world is also that you can stumble upon something. Like Bay City, I mean, it's pretty big, so you can't miss it. But the mainland itself, you can just drive around and see stuff other people made, created even a few years ago, because mainland is permanent, so to say. Or you stumble upon a group of people, you stumble upon a disco or something. And while you can surf around in the internet, it feels a bit different in Second Life. I don't know. I love the mainland.
Yeah, I do too. And I know we've talked about that before, that it's something we wish more virtual world platforms would have, that idea of a larger shared space or contiguous landmass. And I think you said something once about mainland being a kind of equalizer. Why do you think it's been so important in that way for SL?
Because mainland gives you a stable basis, because then every user, even somebody who doesn't have a lot of money or resources to spend on a dedicated server, can buy land and still feel connected to the world, because on the mainland you can just buy a little 512 parcel on some sim and just put your stuff on it, and you have people come by either via car or plane flies over, or you have neighbors. And it's not like your own small island in a void because you can't afford more.
I mean, there is something to be said, obviously, for having more control of your space and your surroundings, as one would in Second Life on a private island or estate, where there are usually different expectations or a theme or a covenant one has to follow. And of course, on the mainland, I'm sure you've seen this as well, or heard people make the point that you don't really control who your neighbor is.
Well, yeah, it can happen, but I haven't seen a lot of bad neighbors on the mainland. I mean, I've drove around on it a lot, but I haven't seen a lot of inappropriate or unnecessary things on the mainland, surprisingly. Of course, there are some people who just build a black box around their parcel and put their stuff into it. But I don't know why they buy a parcel on the mainland. I mean, they can just buy or rent some parcel on private island and they could have total privacy. So, no, but a lot of people take advantage of the mainland and build a lot of great stuff. For example, somebody built a castle beside the road on some cliffs. I mean, usually these cliffs parcels don't really look good because people just stick a platform into it. But somebody really took the time and built a castle with some gardens and some houses into the cliff. It felt like it was supposed to be there, even though it was user created.
That's the amazing thing, though, because it's true. I mean, even though you have these massive continents where the terrain itself was made by Linden Lab, but almost everything else that you see there is user-created, so much of the time, or at least some of the time, you will find these builds that look, as you said, like they were supposed to be there, like they just fit into the world somehow.
Yeah, like East River, the East River community. I also stumbled upon it while driving on the mainland, and it also looks like it's supposed to be there. They bought, I think, 2 or 3 sims and built a little town into it. There's a river going through it. And it looks beautiful. And it's not like on a private island where they buy the island and terraform it to their needs and then just put the city on it. But instead, somebody bought the land and couldn't really terraform it because it's the mainland. I think you can only terraform it 2 meters or 5 meters. So they had to work with what they got, and they still made this amazing experience.
I love East River. That's a great example. And I love finding mainland communities like that span multiple sims and have different people all building together and creating a new sense of place in a particular area. It's like a new little settlement almost.
Yeah, and you can also drive from one to the other. So, for example, in Bay City, we can just hop into a car and drive it all the way to East River or the castle I just mentioned, or even my parcel in Grouse. So, yeah, you have a connection there. And it's also ever-changing, because when you have a private island and the owner doesn't want the island anymore, it just goes away. While on the mainland, because it's owned by Linden Lab, it just stays. So if the owner leaves Second Life, the parcel will be resold and maybe somebody else settles in. So whenever you drive through the mainland, it always changes, but it never vanishes.
That's the thing. Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Grand Theft Auto at one point, and with GTA, you might have the graphics and the performance, and you can still drive around and explore the world and have a lot of fun doing that, which I have. But I don't want to say that it's static, but it is still kind of static compared to Second Life. And of course, it's meant to be. I mean, GTA's world has to remain as the game developers made it. Or it's like with World of Warcraft, unless there's been an expansion or some other major world event, you don't necessarily revisit a zone you've been to before and expect to see huge changes to the places there, whereas with Second Life, that can happen all the time.
Yeah, and also all these big worlds, they're planned by a few people. So it all looks somewhat the same because it all follows the same design principle. Well, in Second Life, you have people from all over the world with different perspectives and different design ideas. So you see a lot of creative stuff because some people just build their little gadgets and designs on their parcel and just leave it there. So you drive by and see some amazing designs, which you can't really in other online worlds because it's all commercial. So everything has a purpose or is designed the same way, and stuff is reused because they don't want to create 100 trees, so they have a base pool of about 10 trees and just place them all over the world. And in Second Life, everyone could create their own tree. I mean, that's a bad example, but in Second Life, everyone uses their own design or something. So it always looks different. You never have a repeating pattern.
Yeah, I mean, it is more chaotic, I guess, in some ways, more unpredictable, but because of that, maybe more interesting, some would say. There's more diversity. I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier, which sort of relates to this. You were saying that with mainland, you actually haven't come across too many bad neighbors, so to speak, but of course, just because things look relatively nice, there can still be that issue that comes up, especially when you're out traveling, of running into ban lines.
I don't know why people buy mainland parcels and then put up ban lines, because one of the reasons you buy a mainland parcel is because you want people to be there. I mean, if you want privacy, you buy or rent on private island, as I mentioned before. But that isn't really a problem if you drive by car. I mostly drive or visit the mainland by car because planes are still a bit buggy. I've tried it, but yeah, there are the ban lines, plus not all the sim crossings go smoothly. And then you're just shot into space. Your plane is returned 3 sims over, and you have to find a rest zone to rest your plane, and then it won't even take off or something. So I like to travel by car because then you can also stop and look around. Plus, it's not too fast, and you can be sure that you don't run into ban lines.
Yeah, as long as you stick to the roads. I think if you're flying and there are ban lines, you have to be, I believe it's 50 meters above the terrain in order to fly overhead. So as long as you go high enough and haven't personally been added by name to a parcel's ban list, you can still travel above it. Nowadays, of course, people don't always have ban lines, but instead they'll have a security orb. I remember I was with Conrad once, this was a while ago. We were flying all the way across Sansara in a helicopter of his, and of course we suddenly get ejected and sent home, because some people like to set the time on their security orb very low. I mean, it's bad enough when the orb is like, you have 10 seconds to get off this parcel, but if it's 5 seconds, or even 0 seconds, instantaneous ejection, that doesn't work so well when you're flying.
I don't understand these people, why they buy mainland parcels. I think some security orb vendors even have a minimum time so that can't happen. I think some have it. Because, yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand people why they do it on the mainland.
Well, what I would love to see, and I don't know if Linden Lab would actually ever do this, but I would love it if they could make it so that someone could still manually eject another person instantaneously from a parcel. Like the parcel's owner could do that if they're at home, or maybe someone else with special access rights to the property. But if it's through a script, like on a security orb, that it couldn't automatically eject someone with less than, say, 30 seconds notice.
Yeah, that'd be a great addition, because you can fly big distances in Second Life. For example, Nautilus, Satori and Gaeta are connected, and there are a lot of airports, and you can just fly from one end to the other for half an hour. And it's not nice if you fly for 20 minutes and then just get ejected by some landowner security orb. And you can't see them on the map, because some viewers allow you to see the ban lines. They show up as red, while the security ops won't show up. Just fly there and hope that you won't get ejected.
Switching gears a little, you joined Second Life, I know, when you were rather young.
Rather, yeah.
So what was that like?
Well, everyone's talking about how bad Second Life is for the youth and how it's sex dungeon after sex dungeon, but I played Second Life and I looked for things a young child would look for. So, like, I played the Second Life Soccer League, and it was bad because it wasn't really scripted well, but it was still fun, and it was like a normal game for me. It wasn't that different from any other game, just with a lot of people, and you could play a lot of different games on it with all the same avatar and your personal customized avatar. It was something else, but it didn't really ruin me, or so to say, that I was thrown into a world full of sex dungeons and people shooting each other. It's kind of like the real internet.
I think you'd even said to me once that you felt like in some ways SL, being there at a young age, was better or safer than the kinds of spaces that you might have found elsewhere on the internet, like on the web?
Yeah, so to say, because I mean, it's kind of the same because you don't stumble. Okay, you can stumble upon sex stuff in Second Life, but mostly it's on private islands or somewhere else, which you only find if you search for it. And it's kind of the same on the internet because on the normal internet, like Reddit, Google, or YouTube, you don't really stumble upon porn, but you have to search for it. And it's kind of the same in Second Life. So if you stick to the normal regions like the mainland or the art stuff, or I think there was even some villages from Austria modeled in Second Life. So there was Salzburg and Vienna. If you just wandered around there wasn't really anything adult themed about it.
Here's another question then. Where do you see Second Life going in the future?
I'm not too sure because I don't know about VR, how VR will pick up in the next few years. But if it really picks up, I don't see a future for Second Life because the technology is too old to support all the new VR gadgets. So I think it will be replaced by another virtual world. I don't think they will shut it down immediately. I think because Second Life still has a strong community behind it, that it will still be running, but it won't be used by the mainstream. So it will just be the old bees sitting around in Second Life and complaining about all the people in the other virtual worlds.
It is interesting, though. I think I was talking with Inara about this at one point, that for many of us who've been in SL a long time, we are so invested in the world. And like you said, you go across the mainland, for example, and it's diverse, and most everything you see there is user created. And yet, we don't actually own the world collectively or individually, or have a say in what ultimately happens to it. I mean, if you really think about it, pretty much everything that makes Second Life worthwhile, interesting to visit, all the things we buy and do, all the things we are, like the avatars, was all made or at the very least facilitated in some way by other users. But the world itself, the virtual land and the platform that all of this is built on and inside of, is not owned by us, it's owned by Linden Lab.
Yeah, but I think that's also a great approach for the mainland because then you have a fixed platform where you know that it will stay, and then you can offer users to put their content on it without much cost. I don't understand it for Sansar because there you don't have a mainland, you just have disconnected islands, and these may as well be hosted by the user himself.
Yeah, self-host or pay to have it hosted somewhere like you would with a website and still be able to move it to another host if for some reason you wanted to change or your original host wasn't an option anymore. That's actually kind of what happened with The Palace, which was another virtual world community that I was part of for many years back in the late 90s and early 2000s. The only reason the community survived after the company itself went bankrupt in 2001 was that it wasn't centralized like Second Life is, but instead every Palace server was its own little world, hosted wherever that particular Palace's owner wanted to host it, and so it didn't all go down with a ship, so to speak. With Sansar, though, I remember Ebby using the WordPress analogy a lot at one point, where he kept saying that Linden Lab wanted Sansar to be like the WordPress of VR. For a long time, I didn't really get what he meant. I mean, I've had a WordPress blog, and it's more like High Fidelity's model, decentralized, hosted on a server of my choosing. But eventually I realized that what he probably meant was not that Sansar would be like WordPress the software, but more like WordPress.com, where you have lots of different WordPress blogs, all hosted centrally by the one company.
I mean, that can be a good thing. I, for myself, have also a WordPress blog, but I also host it myself because then it offers you a lot more options and you aren't really dependent on anyone. I mean, I am dependent on my server hoster, but I can do with my WordPress whatever I want. So I can customize it myself. I can put stuff on it. I can put my own links into it without worrying about if the hoster supports it or not.
Exactly, and you have the added benefit, of course, of WordPress, the software itself, being open source. I mean, the other thing that we're seeing now with Sansar, especially with the recent shift they made toward events, with the layoffs and abandoning of some of the avatar improvements they've been working on and going in this new direction, is that now you have features that may never get added, despite many users feeling like those features would be important for the platform to have in order to actually be successful and attract a bigger population.
That was also a problem in Second Life, where they didn't have enough resources for all the stuff that was happening, so they had to prioritize. There were some bad business decisions at Linden Lab, so they prioritized the wrong stuff. Well, that can't really happen when you have open source, because when you have open source, people just do it themselves and don't wait for you to do it for them.
Yeah, assuming they have the coding skills, of course, or that the platform is popular enough that you can count on there being other people with that knowledge who contribute. It's a shame that High Fidelity didn't get there in terms of attracting critical mass, especially since it could have been a good example of that more decentralized model as a counterpoint to Sansar, if nothing else. There do seem to be some other projects I read about recently, though, people who are planning to use Hi-Fi's code or reuse it and try their own spin on it, and of course they couldn't do that if High Fidelity's code wasn't open source in the first place. With Second Life 2, though, and this goes back to what you said about the lab's decision-making and not having enough resources, I think we've still been extremely lucky that they made the decision to open source the SL Viewer code back in 2007. I often wonder if Second Life would even be around today if it weren't for the third-party viewers like Firestorm, or if we'd still have a Linux viewer for users like me, or even a Mac viewer, considering there still isn't one for Sansar, if it hadn't been for all the work being done by volunteer developers. This is kind of an odd segue, perhaps, but do you remember if there was a point during your early days in Second Life where you really felt like, yeah, I'm probably going to be here a while?
Not really. I just kept on going, I think. There were some pauses in Second Life for maybe 1 year or 1.5 years. It always pulled me back in, but I never said to myself I will stay here for a long time, because most of the times I played on roleplay sims in the early days. As you know, roleplay sims, they go on for about 1 or 2 months before there's drama and they are shut down. So there wasn't really a long-time plan for me to stay in Second Life. It was just new roleplay sim, play for 2 months, then it shuts down, then maybe a pause for half a year, and then the next roleplay sim. So it was up and downs.
So what you're saying is you didn't decide to stay, you just never really left.
Somewhat, yeah. I started coding and then met some people, and now I check in a few times a month and look if everything's still online, not shut down.
I have to say, I wish you were in World a little more often to hang out, but I definitely know how busy things can get with assignments and trying to finish a degree. Let me ask you, I know we talked about last names once, off camera, so to speak, and why those were removed. No one really seems to know why, and now, of course, they're bringing them back. What's something else that you wish Second Life had, or that you wish the lab would do differently?
I'm tracking back to the mainland again, but more geographic features. I love Sansara, because they really went mad with the geographics. For example, the snowlands are a lot of mountains there and hills. And then when you drive north, you go into these green areas with all the rivers. Even without user content, it's still an experience to drive there. It's something visually pleasing.
I know what you mean. It's interesting, though I do love Sansara and all the different areas there. Heterosera, or Heterosera as a lot of people also say it, is still my favorite mainland continent. I think partially because it was the continent that was just coming into being when I first joined Second Life back in early 05. There was just Sansara before that, and then suddenly we had this new continent slowly taking shape, this undiscovered territory, and so Heterosera has always kind of felt to me, even to this day, like a new frontier somehow, even though technically it's the second oldest continent. But I also do love the terrain there and the geographic features it has, like the big lagoon at its center, the mountains and the trails that run alongside them. That's another big thing, actually, that there are so many ways to get around there, so many roads and even the railroad that goes pretty much all around the entire continent, I think.
Yeah, the Second Life railroad network and the road network itself is quite complex for a mainland continent. I think nearly every sim is connected by road or by train or by water. While on the other newer mainland continents, you often just have one road going straight through it and nothing else. So nobody buys the passes on the sims where there's no road access. So they're just empty.
It's fascinating though, isn't it? In a world where we can just fly around and teleport somewhere at the touch of a button, there's still that desire to have a place that's closer to a road or a railroad or a waterway, like you said, something that feels like it gives you more convenient and more realistic access to the rest of the world, even though it's completely unnecessary from a technical standpoint.
I think it gives you directions, because if you fly, there isn't really something which gives you a direction, so you can fly anywhere, but you have to hope find something. While when you drive on the road, you have somewhere to go and something that leads you. And so if you build something beside a road, you can nearly be sure that somebody will drive on that road and will see your build. Not a lot of people fly around hoping to find stuff. Even if you fly around and search for stuff, you fly above a road or above waterways because you know that something will be there.
That's a great point, actually, yeah. Like it's guiding you somehow, giving you clues and something to follow, maybe even a sense of purpose when exploring, making you not feel as lost. That leads pretty nicely, actually, into something else I wanted to ask you about. I feel like in many ways Second Life has suffered from people not knowing what to do there once they join. I mean, this is borne out by the statistics that Linden Lab has released in the past, that tons of people have made accounts never to return. But that's the thing, with SL you don't really know what there is to do unless you already know what there is to do, if that makes sense. I'd imagine that most people who give SL a try for the first time wouldn't necessarily know about all the community resources, the vloggers and bloggers writing about events, and so on, and instead they might turn to the in-world search feature. What's your experience with that and with finding things to do in-world?
Well, I haven't really used the search feature to find anything to do. I mostly stumbled upon it. So, meeting people, talking with them, and Groups are also a big part of seeing stuff. The search feature isn't really something you can use in Second Life. I mean, for events, I think there's an event feature, but I've never used it. It's mostly joining a group and seeing what people write on it, or the group notices of these groups. Or Bay City. Bay City also connects you because then you have the Bay City Alliance, where there's a group notice about all the stuff happening in Bay City. And you can just use that.
I know we're running out of time and you have to get to bed in a minute. Stupid time zones. One last question. The show is called The Avatar's Voice. What do you want to say about your avatar and your connection to it?
A connection to my avatar. It looks similar to me, but it's just a representation. I needed something that I can steer around, but there's no deeper connection to my avatar. I just searched for something which somewhat looked acceptable. It's somewhat similar to me. And it actually was quite hard to find an avatar which just looked like a normal person. Because seemingly most people go into Second Life to live their dream of muscular bodies and movie star figures. It's really hard to find just your average guy avatar on Second Life.
So you didn't want to make an Arnold Schwarzenegger avatar?
No, not really.
So what you're saying is, in real life, you wear a suit all the time, you wear sunglasses all the time, you have slightly spiky hair.
The hair's quite accurate because my hair in real life also stands up at that point, so it's quite funny.
You also have permanent 5 o'clock shadow.
Don't talk about the beard in real life.
How come?
It's somewhat there, but it somewhat isn't.
That actually seems like as good a note to end on as any. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bizi. And thank you to all of you listening out there, whenever and wherever you're listening from. If you want to learn more about Bizi and his work, feel free to follow the links down below. Until next time, this was The Avatar's Voice, and this is Eric Mondrian, logging out.